Final Fantasy XIV is reportedly threatening to drop below 1 million active players. Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and what I just read to you was the title of an article from The Gamer, and I'll leave a link in the description down below. It's been making the rounds on Twitter a little bit, and I want to go over how we got here, and how Final Fantasy XIV can possibly get out of this hole, this rut that it's found itself in, or if it will continue to sink into it. Now, let's lay down some ground rules here first. I am not here to argue exact numbers. I don't care what the exact number of daily players or active players is for Final Fantasy XIV. I care about the trend, and I think anyone with a set of eyes who looks at the internet can find out that the state of the game right now is not necessarily in a good one. And I think it's particularly condemning coming off just the absolute high this game had seen with Shadowbringers and Endwalker. Now, the data from that Gamer article apparently comes from a Japanese blog site called Lucky Bancho, and according to the Gamer, they state that Dawntrail actually lost a significant number of players between patch 7.0 and patch 7.1, whereas other expansions actually grew in players. Continuing from the article, according to Lucky Bancho, over 1.4 million players were active upon the release of Dawntrail, while just 1.1 million were active upon the release of patch 7.1. In comparison, Shadowbringers and Endwalker had 943,000 and 1.3 million players upon their expansion's launch, which then rose to 1.2 million and 1.7 million upon the release of patches 5.1 and 6.1 respectively. Essentially, what is being claimed here is that for Shadowbringers and Endwalker, the active players grew going from their 0.0 to their respective 0.1 patch, whereas for Dawntrail, it declined. Continuing from the article, it's also claimed by Lucky Bancho that players are still dropping rather quickly after patch 7.1, with the active player count going from 1.15 million to about 1.03 million. On that current trajectory, Final Fantasy XIV seems poised to drop below 1 million active players for the first time in a good long while, which should be raising alarm bells for Square Enix, considering Final Fantasy XIV is the game that is propping up the entire company. Now, I don't think it's all doom and gloom, but I think how we got to this position is abundantly clear, and I think it only serves as a disservice to act as if it isn't. I don't think one thing in particular is responsible for this. It's an amalgamation of multiple issues coming into the spotlight here. First and foremost, Final Fantasy XIV is a story-based game. It is what drives the game. It's what drives all the experiences in Final Fantasy XIV. It is a massive component, and Final Fantasy XIV is beloved for its story. So when you produce a stinker, as I've said before, when you have what is regarded as either okay or a dud by a lot of people, when you're 500, 600, thousands of hours into an experience, that hits way harder and way worse than a one-off experience that is completely disconnected. And I think that pain is particularly amplified when you have what is considered to be, by a lot of people out there, a dud of a story coming off the back of your magnum opus. It's going from one extreme to the other. And I think the defense that people run for Dawntrail that, well, it's coming off the back of Shadowbringers and Endwalker, which had so much time in development before those expansions came out, that it is unfair to judge Dawntrail to those standards. I have always disagreed with this notion, and I think it was nothing more than an excuse. Plain and simple. And I don't know why we are trying to utilize this notion that the beginning of a new story can't be fun and interesting and engaging from start to finish. I don't understand that logic. I don't get it. It stems from the same logic that, oh, it's okay, it gets good after 100 hours. People not only are buying the expansion, they are also paying monthly. It should be good from the start, from the jump, and if it isn't, that is a problem. And I've talked about before how I felt that Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail was an experiment. They were testing various different things in tones and storytelling techniques to see if anything stuck and what they should probably utilize going into the future. My problem is that I just don't think most of the things they tested actually worked, and that they worked in tandem with each other to produce an experience that I found largely uninteresting, though I did particularly like the Alexandrian portions, though I can understand why a lot of other people didn't. I am a big fan of FF9. I played it before I played Dawntrail, so my not nostalgia, I didn't even play it that long before Dawntrail, but it's just my adoration for Final Fantasy IX was able to elevate certain elements that for other people who don't have those rose-tinted glasses, it's unable to do that. And look, I know the whole conversation surrounding Wu Clement has been toxic to say the absolute least, but I also don't think she was a good character. And I still don't think she's good in 7.1. She's more tolerable for me, but she's still not someone who I would call a good character. And for someone who takes that big of a role, that much of the spotlight, it is important for that character to be good and well received, and they just simply largely aren't. At least in my experience, but again, if these numbers are even remotely accurate, there's something to be said there. It's not like the smoking gun or anything, but it's another data point on the chart. Now, having said this, I don't think the story itself is necessarily the biggest smoking gun or the biggest chunk of the pie when it comes to the issues that Final Fantasy XIV has right now. I think it revealed a larger problem, and that is the game state. For the longest time, I am a believer that a lot of the technical issues and a lot of the gameplay issues that Final Fantasy XIV suffers from were masqueraded or largely ignored because of people's interest and engagement with the story and the narrative and the characters in the world. That can go a long way. I know that from experience because one of my favorite games of all time is Xenoblade Chronicles 2, a game that I also believe is deeply flawed. It's just the elements that I do appreciate about it, those largely being the story and some gameplay sections, I care about so much and engage so much with that I'm able to overlook the issues. But if I don't have those moments, those elements that I truly do love and appreciate, then it leaves those issues. And that's where I think we are at right now with Final Fantasy XIV. When you have a lot of people disillusioned with the story, you gave me a beginning, middle, and end with the Hydaelyn Zodiac arc, and I don't think they managed to start off this new narrative arc with their best foot forward, or even their second best or third best. Now it leaves a lot of the game state, a lot of the decision making that goes into the patch cadence of a Final Fantasy XIV expansion by itself not being bolstered by how compelling the story, world, and characters are. They're still there somewhat, but not to the degree that it was. I have always felt that Final Fantasy XIV's over-reliance on later patches in the patch cycle to deliver the endgame experience for an expansion was not a good one. I think that is best shown here with Dawntrail. One of the things I was really looking forward to Dawntrail wasn't the story, it was the sheer amount of content that was being offered by Dawntrail. Remember those fanfests advertising the amount of content that Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail was going to have? New Bosja / Eureka, a new relic weapon that wasn't tied to Hildebrand, new variant and criterion dungeons, new deep dungeons, a new limited job. That is not insignificant. But I think when you advertise that amount of content for people, and that content being pretty dang interesting, especially if you do continue to fix and address the loot issue and the gearing, and all that with Final Fantasy XIV. All of that content sounds enticing. But when it's not there for minimum 8 months after the game comes out, it makes the content that is still there from day one feel lacking in comparison, because you don't have the support structure of everything else to bolster the overall experience. It erodes interest in the game state quickly, and then by the time these pieces of content do come out, the interest that was piping hot originally has now fizzled out. People move on and their attention goes elsewhere, and it can be really hard to get it back. All that other content that just expands on the experience and gives players things to do that isn't just high-end rating or instance experiences. That's just not in the game yet. And this is a game people pay monthly for. I'm sorry, but if you're not justifying that monthly sub, people aren't just gonna throw money at you for the lulz. And I don't think waiting for the 0.2 or even 0.3, or let alone whatever patch Beastmaster will be in, likely 0.5 if not 0.55, you're asking people to wait months and months after the game comes out to get a lot of the features and content that were advertised for that expansion. And we know that Final Fantasy XIV saw a massive surge in players in the Shadowbringers and Endwalker era, so a lot of people just aren't used to the way that Final Fantasy XIV does things, and I don't think it's a good way to do things either. And you combine that with a lot of older people realizing, hey, I've kind of done all of this before. I keep meaning to go back to level up my crafters and gatherers, but each time I do it, I'm like, I've done this multiple times before. It's not new or interesting, it's just repetitious at this point, and not in a good way. I try to go back and level up my other jobs because I would like to have some variety there, but then I'm like, dude, I'm not that big of a fan of job design in Final Fantasy XIV right now outside of tanking. I actually quite like the tanks right now, but I'm just not that big of a fan of how Final Fantasy XIV creates DPS jobs right now. There's some that I like, but even then, leveling up old jobs just means running the same dungeons I've run so many times before. It gets stale and old. And the only other way, really, unless I want to spam out the exact same Bosja critical engagements again and again and again, if I want to go run Fates, is like maybe daily quests, but again, that's not like a quick way to go about doing things. This is the true issue that I think Final Fantasy XIV is suffering from right now, stagnancy. When it comes to Dawntrail right now, nothing feels fresh and new. I'm kind of interested in where the story's going from here, but not to the degree that I was any other expansion prior to this. And without that emotional engagement that the story was known to provide for Final Fantasy XIV, it's shown just how repetitious of an experience Final Fantasy XIV can be when it comes to its endgame loop. When it comes to Dawntrail, there's not been like an actual feature that's been particularly compelling that's felt new. You can run more extreme trials, you can run more dungeons, you can run more savage raids, you can run a new ultimate that already has a limited audience, and kind of the sad thing was for Final Fantasy XIV is that when they tried to bring in a brand new feature that would be really exciting and capture a lot of hearts and really try to shake things up, that was Island Sanctuaries. It didn't really do that, did it? I'm having fun in Final Fantasy XIV, but I don't play it like 10 hours a day. I'm having fun doing extreme trials because I haven't done them a lot. I haven't been a hardcore raider in Final Fantasy XIV. And for both people that have, Dawntrail will largely feel stagnant and stale, and if you're not that kind of player, then what is there to do? The Pelu Pelu dailies? Please try to make that defense. Please. I know I'm sounding harsh here, but it's because I love Final Fantasy XIV. I want it to be better, and I want to see it be better. And the unfortunate reality here is it's not like the development team can just snap their fingers and improve the game overnight. These things do take time. And the problem that I have with the game right now, in terms of, if you want this to be a massively successful, massively online role-playing game, we can't be ignoring the MMO part of that tag for much longer. We can't be treating it like it's a second-class citizen for much longer. And we can't be pretending that the story canon should be the only thing propping up this entire experience. Because when you remove that element for a lot of people, like a House of Cards, it'll come tumbling down. And the interest to do other pieces of content that are there in the game will dwindle and fade without that support structure. Final Fantasy XIV is an MMORPG. It is a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. People want to be immersed in a world, and they want to be engaged with the product. And when most of the endgame experience just boils down to like 8-man instance content, I don't think that is sufficient. Chaotic is interesting. Perhaps Cloud of Darkness was tuned a bit too high and it should have been tuned closer to extreme. I know they said they tuned it to be closer to savage, but saying you made a mistake doesn't correct the mistake. And having to wait all this time for the content and for the features that were promised for Dawntrail, for them to finally come out in like, what, 0.2, 0.25, maybe even 0.3? That sucks, plain and simple. I know Final Fantasy XIV has done that before. I know it's known for doing that. That's the exact issue. It just is. You can't not just be consistently waiting for the hype to die down and to dwindle and fade and then pump out all this content, because by the time that happens, no one will care. They used to, because the story kept them intrigued, kept them compelled, kept them walking forward, but without that, the issues are now directly under the spotlight. And I do think job design is a also massive element to this, and I've talked about it before. When the only real endgame the game has right now is high-end combat-specific content, if you don't actually like the combat in the game, that's going to be a massive issue. And like, again, I get that things take time, but saying we might have to wait for 8.0 for the job changes that a lot of people have been asking for, telling someone to wait 2 years, that is not a win. That tells people wait 2 years and and then tune back in, see if we fixed it. I think Dawntrail does have a lot of content, but the problem is it doesn't have the support structure to really support that content, to really incentivize that content. What are we aiming for? What are we achieving? What are we trying to go for by doing all these endgame activities? Run more dungeons, run more raids that we've seen before. An MMO is a live service game. It has to be refreshing. It has to have newness to it. And when Final Fantasy XIV tries to experiment, tries to take a risk and try to add something new, it feels more like a lateral move than the down-the-field Hail Mary attempt that it needs. Chaotic looks really fun. I'll say it. It looks really cool. I'm glad they're trying to do harder content when it comes to 24 players. Does anyone think it will change the needle or like move the needle remotely for anyone? Chances are, if you enjoy the 24-man raid and you love that piece of content, chances were you are already a raider enjoying the game. Realistically, how many people that were casual players or that don't do those high-end instant pieces of content, how many people do you think chose to do chaotic that didn't do that style of content before? That's what I mean by a lateral move. It's not that big wow factor that people are looking for, that people want to be immersed by, that people want to be mesmerized by. That's the issue. I think this will be sorted down the line to some degree as these pieces of content start to come online and if they nail the landing for them, but if they feel samey again, like if the new Bozja just feels like Bozja again, it's not going to last that long. If Cosmic Exploration just boils down to Ishgard Restoration 2.0 and you stand in like a 5-foot square doing crafting orders repeatedly, sure, that might bring some excitement because I thought Ishgard Restoration was cool, but do we think it's going to be the saving grace that it could be? And assume all these pieces of content are able to stick the landing. When we come around to 8.0 and 8.x, we're going to run into the same exact patch cadence issue yet again. In my opinion, Final Fantasy XIV needs to feel like a new and fresh experience with a bunch of new content to play with the 0.0 version. Just the main story and the first wing of the raid does not cut it. It can when people are immersed enough in the story, the world, and the characters. But unless we see massive changes in terms of those elements when it comes to 8.0, if we have another Dawntrail scenario, we're just gonna find ourselves back to this situation again, but probably in an even worse state for the game. And I don't want Final Fantasy XIV to continue to decline. I love the game. I want to see it get better and to prosper, but I don't think its current trajectory is a healthy one. And with that, I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Leave a comment down below with what element of Final Fantasy XIV. You know what? No. List the elements that you think Final Fantasy XIV needs to improve on. Not just one. I want to hear all of them. I want yappers in this comment section. Yap up a storm. I want constructive feedback. Dude, I want a manifesto. Because I believe constructive feedback is critical when it comes to trying to improve the game. And with that, I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe. Have a great day. Go play some video games, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.